Okay, is everyone ready? I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome all of you here tonight that are here in person. We very much appreciate you coming down to listen to your city's business and to listen to how your money is being spent, and we appreciate all of your concerns and welcome your letters and emails and phone calls. And we welcome all of those who are at home watching tonight too. We appreciate you watching and your interest in the city. First item is the roll call, please.
Councilmember Norton. Councilmember Story.
Here.
Councilmember Bottorff.
Here.
Councilmember Termini.
Here.
Mayor Harlan.
Here. Will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item that we have tonight is a certificate of appreciation to Sandy Williams. This is a certificate of appreciation to Sandra Williams for service as the city's representative on the Advisory Council of the Area Agency on Aging from November 2007 through December 2012. And I just want to say a little bit about the Area Agency on Aging because a lot of people don't know very much about it. I served on it for a number of years, and it was a wonderful experience and wonderful work. The Seniors Council is a community-based nonprofit organization that provides services in Santa Cruz, San Benito, Monterey, and Santa Clara counties. It operates the Area Agency on Aging in San Benito and Santa Cruz County, foster grandparent programs, senior companion programs, Project Scout, which assists with tax preparation. It receives federal, state, and local funds for senior services and distributes these to direct service providers and oversees program operations. So it acts as an umbrella organization to receive these state and federal, local funds to then give them to other agencies in the community to provide important services. They conduct public hearings, workshops, and forums to explore issues of interest to seniors. They follow legislation, and they advocate for seniors. Now, how did this all come about, and why are we doing it? Well, we'll all be seniors someday, or some of you are seniors, and there's a great need for services. And this was recognized by the federal government, by Congress in 1965, when they passed the Older Americans Act. That is also the time that they passed Medicare and Medicaid. And I know some of you who are older or who have parents or grandparents that are on Medicare, and you probably can't imagine a time that there wasn't a Medicare, but there was a time that there wasn't a Medicare. And many people were able to afford insurance plans, medical plans, but many people had trouble having the money to do that, and they worked for employers who didn't provide anything during retirement. So this was a very important time and greater awareness for the needs for seniors. And Henry Mello, our senator, was very active in passing senior legislation when he was in Sacramento. And I asked him once, I said, Henry, why did you choose that topic? And why were you working so hard and passed so many bills and getting your colleagues so interested in this? He said, because nobody else was. And I thought that was wonderful. So anyway, I just wanted to thank the agency and the volunteers, and especially Sandy, and give her a few minutes to talk about her time on the board if she wanted to, or to say anything. I really appreciate everyone here who volunteers and does things, and this is an area we really need to focus on more for the future, because the baby boomers are going to be a huge generation with huge needs for transportation, medical, social support, Meals on Wheels, all kinds of things. And we really need to start planning for it now. So thank you very much.
Well, I just want to thank the City of Capitola for this opportunity. After a career in law enforcement and a year of being retired, I came to this community thinking I was going to pop down on the beach and get some sun and have a few margaritas. And then I started watching people that were 20 years older than me, where they lived in the mobile home park up on the hill here, where we all chose to retire, and watched them every morning get up and go into town and fill brown bags, you know, for the people that aren't fortunate to have enough to eat. And then they would go work at not just the food banks, but clothing distributors, and it just went on, and I started feeling ashamed because I was in a career to protect and serve, and then I ended up being lazy and just thinking about myself. So they taught me not to forget the values, to help others, and I just want to thank the City of Capitola, who's been very generous when it comes to opening up the pocketbooks and helping seniors that are in need and the disabled of our community. And thank you so much, Stephanie.
You're welcome. I have 2 books for her. I have a copy of Hot Off the Press, the Capitola book that's for sale in the museum. And I have a great murder mystery for her by the author Nevada Barr, who was a park ranger, and she writes wonderful murder mysteries in all of the national parks. And I worked up in Yosemite for 2 years. And when I read the book, I said only a local could have written it. And she was. She'd been a ranger in Yosemite for a couple of years and knew all these inside stories and inside places.
Thank
So
you.
You're welcome.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. Next item is a report on closed session, please, from Mr. Kandati.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Harlan, members of the City Council. There were 4 items on this evening's closed session agenda. The first was conference with labor negotiator. That related to the Police Officers Association, the Capitola Police Captains, and the Police Chief. Items D and E on your consent agenda are actions contemplated by that relating to the POA and the Police Chief. There's no other reportable action on that item. There was also a public employee performance evaluation involving the city manager. There was no reportable action on that item. There was 1 item of pending litigation, Monterey Bay Confederation of Clubs and Steve Verhagen versus the City of Santa Cruz et al. Council received a report on that, but there was no reportable action. Finally, there was 1 liability claim involving claimant Scott McCann. That is item C on your consent agenda. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda tonight? Then this is the time for public comments. You can come up and talk to us about anything that's not on the agenda. If it's on the agenda, please wait till we get to it.
Oh.
Is it on the agenda?
No.
Oh, then you can come up now. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Todd. I'm a resident of Courtyard Drive up here in Capitola. And some of you may know me as a Pajaronian reporter. I'm not here for that matter at all. I'm just a resident. And my concern is that there's a giant redwood tree, actually a cluster of them, right next to my house. And I emailed all of you a few months ago. And so you may be familiar with what I'm talking about. The tree in question is probably this far away from my house. And it's big, and therein lies the problem because you consider it a heritage tree. Now, we called out, or actually my homeowners association called out Lewis Tree Service, who 3 times, to my understanding, has asked to cut it down. And it's been denied 3 times by the city. Based on the word of an arborist that you hired named James Allen. Now, my concern is this. James Allen is not a structural engineer. And I would venture to guess that he's probably not qualified to say whether or not there's danger to a structure. In his website, it says he is dedicated to the preservation of trees. And this is a concern to me because, you know, we elect you guys to protect us, the residents, not the trees. I talked to a guy, and forgive me, I don't remember the gentleman's name from the city. I believe his name was Ed, who said, we don't cut down trees for arbitrary reasons. And I think I've made it pretty clear that I'm not asking for an arbitrary reason. That this is a tree that's very well could be endangering my house. It's not dropping leaves on my car. It's not annoying me by knocking on my window. Now, if my tree does not have to come down, great. I love it. You know, my kids play around it. But I would like you to consider, if this is indeed the city policy, to change the policy. When a resident with a real need to cut down a tree because it's endangering their house asks to cut it down, perhaps you can consider hiring a structural engineer, not an arborist who is dedicated to dedicated to preserving trees. And by the way, in that same cluster of trees, there was a tree that was cut down because my next door neighbor convinced Ed that it was indeed endangering her house, a separate tree that has been cut down. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you can appeal that decision to the Planning Commission.
I can, but I believe it costs me some amount of money that I can't afford.
The homeowners association, can they do that?
The homeowners association, to my understanding right now, is getting another consulting arborist.
They would have to appeal it, I think.
Okay,
Is it because you don't own the property? That's common property out there, probably.
that is correct.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dennis, do you have another idea?
Well, if you think that a structural engineer is going to come forward and say that it's damaging your structure, I would do that and bring it to the city and see how the response is there.
Okay.
That's not a bad course.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, folks.
Would anyone else like to speak?
I'm going to have to do a disclaimer on this guy. Got one of my shirts at Goodwill.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Patur, and I'm involved with a hostel project in Santa Cruz. I would encourage you to visit. So when the Rispin Mansion project comes up again, that you might be informed of what we were doing in Santa Cruz. Because in Santa Cruz we took the property that belongs to the city, which is the Commodore Cottages up on Beach Hill on Main Street, 321 Main Street, and the city didn't know what to do with it. And then we finally got a lease agreement and so forth, and we built this 45-bed hostel at the cottages and resurrected the buildings. They were all condemned, and the city didn't spend any money at all on this project. We were able to raise the funds through the Coastal Commission, which provides funds whenever a fancy hotel gets built along the coast. They have to pay mitigation fees, and they paid about one third of the cost of this. The rest of it was raised by people staying at the hostel. It seems to me that Rispin Mansion would be well served by having a hostel. The city of Capitola would be well served because we put up a lot of young people from all around the world who will come again and maybe stay at fancier places the next time. So I encourage you to come and visit the hostel at 321 Main Street. Michael Termini is the only one so far that's seen it. We've done quite a bit of work on landscaping recently, so it looks pretty good. So that's why I encourage you to visit there and take a look. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak?
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Susan Wallace. I live in Aptos.
Can you speak in the microphone, please?
Yes,
Thank
my
you.
name is Susan Wallace. I live in Aptos. I just wanted to share, when I was a student at UCSC some 40 years ago, I wanted to share some information about Wi-Fi. A student that I knew there, Martha Herbert, has since become a pediatric neurologist at Harvard Medical School, and she wrote a letter on February 8th, 2013 to the Los Angeles Unified School District to let people know that that she was concerned about Wi-Fi after doing a whole lot of research, writing a 60-page single-space paper. She says, I am a pediatric neurologist and neuroscientist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School and on staff at the Massachusetts General Hospital. I am board certified in neurology with special competency in child neurology and subspecialty certification in neurodevelopmental disorders. So she reviewed all the research, and she says, I ended up producing a 60-page single-space paper with over 550 citations. In fact, there are thousands of papers that have accumulated over decades and are now accumulating at accelerating pace as our ability to measure impacts become more sensitive that document adverse health and neurological impacts of EMF RFR. Children are more vulnerable than adults, and children with chronic illnesses and or neurodevelopmental disabilities are even more vulnerable. Elderly or chronically ill adults are more vulnerable than healthy adults. So she also says EMF RFR from Wi-Fi and cell towers can exert a disorganizing effect on the ability to learn and remember, and can also be destabilizing to immune and metabolic functions. This will make it harder for some children to learn, particularly those who are already having problems in the first place. She's talking in particular about children, but in general, last part here, powerful industrial entities have a vested interest in leading the public to believe that EMF RFR, microwave radiation from wireless technology, which we cannot see, taste, or touch, is harmless, but this is not true. Please do the right and precautionary thing for our children. I urge you to step back from your intention to go Wi-Fi in the LA Unified School District and instead opt for wired technologies, particularly for those subpopulations that are most sensitive. It will be easier for you to now make a healthier decision than to undo a misguided decision later. So she's saying that. Also, the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, same kind of stuff. A bunch of doctors from, I guess they're located in Kansas. But one of the things that I think for us as parents and just as adults in the schools, the systems they use in the schools are way stronger than the ones you might use at home. And so our kids are being exposed for years and years at a time, for hours and hours a day, to this microwave radiation. They're guinea pigs, essentially, for the wireless industry. And so I think if we start thinking, I'm asking your help to, let's try to protect our kids, because I'm afraid of the cancers and the looming public health crisis that this is, talking about, that we're facing. And I think we owe our children better than what we're doing right now. So, okay.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Who would like to speak next? Good evening.
Good evening, Marilyn Garrett. And on a similar theme, one of the things that could be done, of course, is to remove the Wi-Fi microwave radiation and replace it with wired solutions like you had before we got irradiated. As I was listening to the award given prior to the public comment here, of course I'm a senior too, but I was also thinking of the work of Dr. Magda Havas, who also writes about the dangers of the microwave radiation, especially for children. But she also talks about rapid aging syndrome, the effect on the cells on our body to cause dysfunction, rapid aging syndrome. And we know of the adverse health effects. It's been presented to you many times from independent scientists. So as you talk about in future years, we're going to see more and more problems. This kind of exposure is part of it. And when the so-called smart meters of PG&E were put in, and I saw the photo of the walls of meters on the Bay Avenue Senior Complex, I thought, and I know people who live there are feeling much worse health-wise than they did prior. We should be doing all we can as citizens, as public health officials, to remove the damage. I think of this month of August. It makes me tremendously sad, because August 6th and August 9th of 1945, the U.S. dropped nuclear weapons on Hiroshima on the 6th. Tomorrow's the anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing, on a city, on a town like this, with women and children and pets and just people going about their business, a civilian population. About 100,000 people were killed with each bombing. And I heard also historically that Japan pretty much was already pretty much surrendered. But the U.S. actually wanted to test these weapons and show the then Soviet Union the power of the United States. People today are dying still, and children are born deformed from the radiation then. And it's going on today because these radionuclides are long-lasting. We have Fukushima, and I found out not so long ago that the non-ionizing radiation from Wi-Fi, cell towers, smart meters has the same biological effects causing cancer, DNA strand breaks, as the nuclear or the ionizing radiation. The mechanism is different. And so we as responsible citizens and elected officials need to be assuring proof of safety, working with Citizens for Safe Technology, and removing the damage. So it's with a heavy heart I always think of this, and I've seen pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the kids and the clothing patterns burned onto people, and I just, to me, is so unconscionable, and exposing, forcing people any kind of radiation is so wrong and so damaging, not only to people, but to all wildlife and all life on the planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Who would like to speak next? Then we'll go on to the City Council comments. Are there any City Council comments?
I have a few.
Good, Mike.
We unveiled the new kiosk down in the village. Please go down and take a look at the new bronze otter and informational kiosk. I don't think it was 10 minutes after we unveiled it when tourists were lining up to have their picture taken in front of it because it says Capitola by the Sea. So it's a new photo op. National Night Out was a great success this Tuesday. Saw many of you there, many of our fellow citizens. Big fun and great community. And I emailed everyone on the City Council and our City Manager a picture of a pier in Southern California. A friend of mine drove up visiting all the piers, and we have the smallest and least visible American flag and flagpole of any pier in California, and it's a call to action. Bigger flagpole, bigger pier flag.
Good task for you, Mike.
Bigger pier, bigger flag.
I'll take anything, but we'll start with the pole and the flag. Thank you.
Ed? Dennis?
Yes, there was a recent survey taken by AMBAG involving the 3 counties, and I think it was sent out to all the council members. I'd like to request that that survey be put online, too, for the public to see. And certainly we've seen in priorities and issues within our cities changed in the last, since 2007 to today, and anyone that gets a chance to see a survey, and certainly in growing to the top of the list has been crime in our county. Transportation has fallen to one of the bottom issues. Housing has fallen to one of the bottom issues. And it's an interesting cross perspective of our community if you look at this survey, and also tells you how our transportation network is working and where it's lacking and where needs are in the future. And so take heed. There's some issues in Santa Cruz County that need long-term solutions that this council also will be working on. So I'd like to request that survey be put to public view if possible.
You can put a copy at the counter for people.
Yeah, we can get a copy of that onto our website. We do have
For
a
the
copy
website?
of it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Dennis?
That's it.
Sam?
No comment.
There's 2 workshops next week that some of you might be interested in. They're both on Thursday night, so you're going to have to choose. If you're interested in electric vehicles and learning more about it, from 6 to 7:30, Ecology Action is sponsoring a electric vehicle workshop, and it's at their office downtown Santa Cruz at the old Sentinel office building. The other one is that night from 5:30 to 7:30. It's a green business event, and it's going to be at the Community Foundation building in Aptos, right across from Rio Del Mar Shopping Center. So if you're a business person or have friends with a business person and they're interested in getting to be more green and more recycling and buying recycled products and want some more information, this will be a good workshop to go to. The third thing is I have a workbook to show you. At the last sanitation district meeting, we had a report from one of our environmental coordinators. We have put signs on our sanitation district trucks now reminding people not to pour grease down the drain and flush things down the toilet. because it clogs them up, and then we have to do a lot of extra maintenance. So there's some kind of catchy signs now on the sanitation district trucks that you might see around. They also have a program where they go into schools and teach the kids about being better environmental stewards. And they use this book called Journey for the Planet, a kid's 5-week adventure to create an Earth-friendly life. Be part of the global warming solution by David Gershon. And they have different chapters on water and energy and recycling and all sorts of things. And they work with children from elementary, middle school, and high school. And this program is provided free to the schools. And they've been in many, many schools in this county, and they're doing a lot of good work for the students. And the workbook encourages the students to take it to talk to their parents about implementing some of these things. So I just wanted to pass this along. Okay, if there's nothing else, then the consent calendar, and we have a couple of items.
Madam Mayor, I did want to make one minor announcement. Previously, the council had selected a day in October 13th, where we were going to close the Esplanade to test out a day without traffic on the Esplanade. You'll recall that planned event was conditioned on the lower parking lot for Pacific Cove being completed by that time. Unfortunately, the project has had to be rebid by the city, and so the project will not be open by October 15th. So staff is going to cancel the October 13th date, and we will bring an item back this winter to pick a date for a similar event next spring.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, the consent calendar are a list of relatively minor items that are considered under one motion unless someone would like to pull an item from the audience, or if a council member would like to pull it. And we'd like to pull, or I'd like to pull the item number E, the Memorandum of Understanding with the Police Officers Association, so we can tell you what we just settled. And we're very proud of it. So would anyone like to pull any other items?
I'll move the consent calendar. Except for item E.
So, we have to open this to public first, I think.
Would any member of the public like to pull any item? Then we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, item E is an agreement with our police officers, the police department, and we'd like Jamie to give you all a little introduction to it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As required by state law, the city has gone into a negotiating process with the police officers union these last several months. Their current agreement with the city expired as of June 30th, 2013. The agreement before you tonight is being recommended by the city's negotiating team for the City Council for approval and has been ratified by the Police Officers Union. It's a new 5-year contract. It includes no cost of living adjustments, no wage increases this first year. Includes salary increases in years 2 through 5 at the Consumer Price Index with a cap of 3%, 3.5%. 3.5% and 3.5%. That is, the cost of living increase is capped out at 3.5% in the out years. There is also a small cost of living increase for the health care benefit. That's at 4% the first year and then 2.5% the year after, which is a relatively minor increase, which we hope will keep up with the cost of health care in the future, but if past trends have been any indication, will probably not. The city's way it deals with retirement benefits. As you'll recall, we put in place a 2nd-tier retirement system, and then the state put in place new retirement reforms that affect every city in the state. In addition to that, the city has a cap on its contribution to retirement benefits. That cap is not changed in this agreement. So all in all, it's an agreement that is recommended by the negotiating team to the City Council. I think it does a very good job of protecting the city's long-term financial interests while helping police officers salaries stay competitive as we move forward.
Would anyone else like to say anything about it? One of the reasons why we're very happy is it's for 5 years. It takes a lot of time to negotiate with employee groups, and a lot of uncertainty, people not knowing what they're going to have next year when their contract's up, or 2 years when their contract's up. So this gives a lot of peace, I think, to the employees and to the city, the management of the city. Dennis.
This is the first 5-year contract that I can remember in my 15 years on the council. And I want to thank the police officers of our city and our police chief for being cooperative and understanding of the city's conditions and the community's conditions and financially, and help us resolve this. A 5-year contract with police department is really something to speak favorable for. And I also thank Jamie Goldstein for his negotiations with this. And as a council, I think we're pretty proud of the fact that we have such a good police department here and that are happy doing what they do. And I think it's a very fair contract for both sides.
Any other comments?
Well, if I may, Mayor, also, I also wanted to thank the police officers for really engaging in a very professional negotiating process and really arriving at an agreement that is not only long-term but reasonable and fair for both the residents of Capitola and for the officers themselves. And I think this is significant because with public safety being such a concern in this county, we here in Capitola now have the benefits of having a long-term labor agreement with the Police Officers Association and working very closely hand in hand with them to preserve, public safety, because that is really, I don't think there's any greater contribution to the quality of life in the city of Capitola than the police department and the chief of police that we have that lead them. So this is a monumental and I think wonderful results that we've been able to deliver, and I think just some special recognition for the police in helping us get there is due. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
One thing, Stephanie, I just add special kudos to Lisa Murphy, too, for her hand in helping this negotiation.
Is there a motion to accept?
I move, yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the wonderful police officers and everybody in the police department. The next item is 10A. We have one item, a request for a coastal development permit and a vesting tentative map to allow the Surf and Sand Mobile Home Park to convert to an owner-occupied park. Good evening, Mr. Shantz, and welcome. Nice to see you.
Good evening, council members. It's good to be here. And a PowerPoint presentation is going to lead us through the staff report. Let's see. So the project before you is, the project before you tonight is the conversion of the Surf and Sand Mobile Home Park from a rental mobile home park to an owner-occupied mobile home park. It requires both a subdivision permit and a coastal development permit. What I'd like to do first is just look at the setting. Well, oh, here we go. Don't quite. Well, there you go. Excuse me, getting oriented by this computer here. First, I'd like to look at the physical setting, and then we'll look at the project itself, and then third and lastly, we'll look at how the project complies with the applicable regulations. You see by this aerial photograph, Surf and Sand is a 73-space existing mobile home park on Jewel Box Hill. It's on one parcel right now, a 4 1/3 acre parcel in the Jewel Box Hill neighborhood. To the left or the north, you see 47th Avenue and Jade Street Park, and to the south, you see the thoroughfare of Portola Drive and East Cliff Drive. Now, looking a little closer, you see at the south, it's really the railroad tracks that's recently been acquired by the County Regional Transportation Commission. And again, to the north, which was the left side of the previous image, is Jade Street Park and 47th Avenue. And then the bottom images show 49th Avenue, which is the opposite side of the mobile home park, which is primarily a single-family dwelling neighborhood. Now, the project itself would take that 4.35 acre parcel and divide it into 73 individually owned parcels, as you see here, and 4 common lots. This will need a homeowners association to manage the common lots. The lots that you see here are all based on the existing layout of the mobile home as it exists today. Mobile home park, excuse me. And there is no construction that is proposed as part of this project. No new streets, no new buildings, no new infrastructure as part of this proposed project. Now, the individual lots will be based on the same shape and size as the current mobile home spaces. That's why they're configured the way they are. They range in size from just over 1,500 square feet to 2,954 square feet. So you can see an example with the 2 images there. The top image showing the smaller space. And outdoor space is more or less limited to the carport area that you see. And then the bottom image shows the larger space. And they, of course, have much more land, enough for regular yard space with the lawn that you see there. So those would be the individually owned lots. Again, there would be 4 common lots. This showing, of course, just a portion of the project site, but it does show some of the common lots. They would primarily be the interior streets that serve the mobile home park currently. One of those streets, shown on this image here, opens up into a picnic area, as shown in the lower right of the screen. That would also be commonly owned and managed by the Homeowners Association. And then lastly, another common lot, known as Lot C, would be the clubhouse that acts as also a meeting room and laundry facility. So the clubhouse building and the parking space that serves it would also be a common owned lot. Now, the conversion of a rental mobile home park to an owner-occupied mobile home park, such as this one, requires 2 approval. It requires a subdivision approval for a vested tentative map, and because the project is located in the California's coastal zone, also a coastal development permit. Let's look at the subdivision approval first. The State Subdivision Map Act, as I'm sure you're aware, regulates how cities and counties can divide land as subdivisions. But the Subdivision Map Act has specific provisions, and they're here at the second bullet, that pertain to the conversion of mobile home parks. And it's quite specific. And there have been case law on the subject. And case law has resulted in telling California localities that local zoning and subdivision regulations cannot be applied when there is this type of a project. So when your council looks at this project, you would look at how it conforms to the applicable regulations of the State Subdivision Map Act. The second approval, Coastal Development Permit, of course, comes from the California Coastal Act, and that's implemented here in Capitola by Capitola's local coastal plan. And staff has reviewed the project to see if it does comply with the applicable policies of Capitola's LCP, and it does. The other act is not really part of the Coastal Act, and it's known as the Mello Act, yes, named for the same Henry Mello that you spoke of earlier. And the Mello Act is important because it protects or attempts to preserve low and moderate income housing in the coastal zone. Let's look at the Subdivision Map Act a little more in depth. These bullet points basically show the state regulations for the conversion of mobile home parks. And the most important is the first bullet. The applicant must prepare a report on the impact of the conversion on low and moderate income people. And that impact report has been prepared, and it has included many of the things that you see in the other bullet points. The tenants were explained in that report. They will be offered the option to either purchase the land underneath their mobile homes or continue as renters, and that's part of the state law. Also, as required by the applicable portions of the Subdivision Map Act, a survey was done for all mobile home residents in support or not of the conversion. And that was done according to an agreement that between the Tenants Association and the applicant, and the certification or the document showing that agreement is attached to your staff report. In terms of the survey was delivered to 42 households. I understand at that time many of the mobile homes were vacant. That's why the survey was delivered to only 42 households. Of that, 29 responded, and of the 29 respondents, 24 were in support. 2 were opposed, and 3 abstained. In other words, they made comments, but they didn't vote either way. Now, the survey results were given to the city clerk, who tabulated them, and the results of that tabulation is also attached to your staff report. Also included in the impact report is an acknowledgement by the applicant that there are limits on rent increases for those residents who choose to continue to rent. And those limits are spelled out in the applicable portions of the State Subdivision Map Act. Without going into a lot of detail, basically low and moderate income people, their rents can only increase according to increases in the Consumer Price Index. For people who are not low or moderate income, their rents can increase all the way to market rents, but it has to be done in equal increments over a 4-year period. Looking now at the Coastal Act and the Mello Act. Again, the local coastal plan implements California's Coastal Act here in Capitola. We did look at the applicable policies and found that all the applicable policies, there is compliance with those with this project. And your coastal permit findings that are embodied in your resolution speak to that in terms of the findings to be made for LCP consistency. Now, the Mello Act, again, it's not really part of the Coastal Act, but it is important in terms of protecting housing in the coastal zone. The Mello Act typically requires replacement of low or moderate income housing when it may be lost or when it might be converted from rental to ownership. And this, of course, would be that type of a project. But there are some cases where the Mello Act does not apply. One of those is when a city, any local jurisdiction, but specifically a city in California, has less than 50 acres of privately owned land available for residential use. Capitola is one of those cities. So you as a council could determine that in this instance the Mello Act does not apply. Staff has made conditions of approval recommended for your council, and there are 6 conditions of approval. They're kind of summed up in these 5 bullet points. Submitting a final map to the City Public Works Department is, of course, required for all subdivisions, and the final map would be in more detail than the project plans that you have before you. Also, before that final map could be approved by the city, the applicant would need to submit the purchase rental option agreement that I explained in a previous slide to both the city attorney and the community development director for their review and approval before the final map could be approved. And then next, there would need to be the legal formation of a homeowners association. That would also be submitted to city staff before final map would be approved. And the duties or responsibilities of the HOA would be spelled out. And one of them, of course, the most important, is on that bullet point there. They would manage what goes on the 4 common lots. And then lastly, the conditions do spell out that there would be no construction as part of this project. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on June 18th. And are recommending approval of this project. Staff has made findings, 2 sets of findings, subdivision findings and coastal development findings, and they are attached to your resolution. And we are recommending approval of this project, and that concludes my staff report.
Thank you. Where's the 4th common lot? You showed us 3.
Yes. The common lots A, B, and D are all the interior streets. So if we go back to, you can see this interior street. I believe that's A. It would be B. C is the clubhouse. And then D is this street and the intersecting streets and the picnic area.
Thank you. Mike?
Question. When this becomes a subdivided park, the installation of new mobile homes will still be regulated by the state, correct? So they will do the proper inspections as far as setbacks and clearances and connections.
That's correct.
And will this development, like any other development that we've seen, have CC&Rs developed?
Yes. One of the conditions we speak to that CC&Rs would also need to be included as part of the homeowners association, and they would be submitted to staff for review and approval before.
And when all of these items come back, all of these conditioned items come back, will we see it again as this body?
No, this would be, if you choose to approve this, this would be the final time it would come in front of the council in a public hearing situation. These items that you're referring to would be reviewed by various city staff, city attorney, community development director, and so forth.
Like with most staff review and decision, we can, as part of this hearing, request that all those documents do come back to us, though, can we not?
I don't think that there's a discretionary review that's included in this section of the Subdivision Map Act for that level of review.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a couple questions. Can permanent structures be built on any of these individual lots once we've condominiumized this project?
I think that would be a function of the CC&Rs, whether the CC&Rs would allow that. It is a mobile home exclusive zone district, so I would think that at least that particular zoning regulation would apply. I might need to defer to both gentlemen to my left.
The site is zone mobile home exclusive, and our zoning would still apply.
And if there were, they would actually come under the jurisdiction of the city. Is that correct, if they became permanent structures? Because they would not be mobile homes? So in other words, do we have controls once this thing is subdivided and keeping these from becoming permanent structures?
I don't believe our mobile home exclusive zoning district allows stick-built buildings, so it would have to require a rezone, is my understanding.
Okay. With all the DRE requirements, such as the CC&Rs, homeowners association, and budgets, which one of those things does the city see before the signing of the final map?
We have the conditions of approval. Number 4. Prior to recordation of the final map, the applicant shall submit CC&Rs to city staff, including the city attorney. The CC&Rs shall include legal establishment of a homeowner association, and the rights and responsibilities of that HOA are spelled out in condition number 4.
It appears to me that really the agencies that really oversee this project would be, at this point, would be the DRE and California Housing, which controls mobile home parks. Is that true? Those are the 2 agencies that would really oversee this project. And what about during the process of improvements to infrastructure? Is that all written into? There's no improvement plans with this. This is unusual. We don't see any improvement plans. So we see a recording of a final map. So is it DRE? Will it be DRE requirements that certain improvements be taking place? I would think that would normally be a case with any new project or condominiumizing anything, that that the Department of Real Estate would want to know that they're protecting the public as to infrastructure improvements that need to go in there. Is that part of this deal?
I can tell you, we might wait until the public hearing portion. I can tell you from the Planning Commission hearing that the applicant has said that they are installing new utilities. Now, that's not really part of this project, and the extent to the new utilities, that might be something that you'd want to ask during the public hearing day. Period.
And maybe we're not the right jurisdiction to even do that. Maybe it's better in the hands of the state of California. But my experience with DRE is they require that you spell out to the buyer exactly what improvements are going to be, or what they're buying in cases like this. So that would include the establishment of the means of turning the homeowners association over to the tenants, and also a budget. Okay. I'm a little confused to why this project is exempt from CEQA. I've never seen a project in my life that came through planning discretion that was exempt from CEQA. Maybe you can explain that a little bit to us.
Yeah, and I'm remiss in not talking about that in my presentation. So, California Environmental Quality Act, as you know, requires projects that may have any impact or potential for impact on the environment to undergo environmental review where there's environmental analysis. Now, in this case, we don't believe that there will be any impact to the environment, primarily because there is going to be no physical change. There's going to be no construction. There's not going to be anything that could potentially create more surface drainage issues than there are now, for example, or lack of solar access than there are now. CEQA does have certain categories of exemptions where certain types of projects are exempt from environmental review. One of those is the Class 1 exemption, which is very minor projects where there are really no alterations to land or physical changes. And we believe that this is the appropriate category for this project. So we say a categorical exemption, Class 1, is appropriate for this project, and then therefore it would be exempt from environmental review.
Okay. The tenants who decide to remain in the park, can they be moved or relocated to other places in the park? Is that part of the agreement, or is the agreement that they can stay where they are?
They can stay where they are if they choose to stay where they are as tenants, or if they wanted to buy the underlying land. The economic impact report on the conversion that the applicant prepared looked at is there a problem? Is there any economic displacement? And because tenants, existing tenants now, will be given the option of either buying or continue renting, the conclusion is that there will be no economic displacement of existing residents, and staff agrees with that conclusion.
Okay. And understanding the CC&Rs will come back to planning and to
the city
attorney for approval. Is that a negotiating thing, or is that something that, I mean, that's really established at DRE level, I think, and submitted to them. Does that come after DRE approves it, or does that come before it goes to DRE?
I'm not sure, but it's prior to recording the final map, so.
Okay.
But as far as how DRE's involvement is, we don't really have any say in that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Norton, I did want to correct my statement about single-family homes and mobile home parks. They are allowed on parcels that are larger than 5,000 square feet.
Okay.
So you can have, on a larger parcel, if you were to consolidate, you could put a single-family home.
Okay. Does that come into under the city's jurisdiction as soon as that's done?
I believe it would, yes.
It would, okay. Thank you.
Sam?
Oh, thank you. Just to follow up on that, are there currently any parcels proposed that are larger than 5,000 square feet?
No, there are not.
That are not in this?
Yeah.
Okay. Going back on the question of the infrastructure improvements or their lack thereof, could you clearly educate us about the extent of our jurisdiction or ability to require any infrastructure improvements in either denying or approving this subdivision?
Well, it's my understanding that you wouldn't have that authority because your authority is limited to what's spelled out in the Subdivision Map
Right.
Act.
Okay, and the city attorney concurs with that?
That's correct. There has been a number of cases that have addressed that, and the findings that are contained in the resolution of approval address the specific requirements of Section 66427.5 of the Subdivision Map Act, and you really have very little ability to go beyond that and add additional conditions.
Right. Okay, thank you. Now, with that, I mean, I was on the conditions of approval in the first condition. At the very last sentence, in the first paragraph, it says no new construction of street utilities or similar improvements is opposed or authorized as a result of this improvement. Based on just what I've heard, why is this a condition of approval? Both from the standpoint we don't seem to have jurisdiction over any of those matters in any event, and on the other standpoint, why would we want to get in the way or have something apparently interfere with possible improvements?
Well, that last sentence was just to make it clear that this approval doesn't authorize or include any new construction. Now, possibly the word "or authorize" might be a little strong and might be something that your council might want to strike out of that particular sentence.
Okay, thank you for that. Going on to the HOA, I mean, during your presentation, you seem to refer that they only had jurisdiction over the common areas. But in fact, they will be enforcing the CC&Rs, which will apply throughout the park. So the HOA, in effect, will be able to, govern and control what takes place in this park.
That's correct.
And not just the common areas.
And the information that I included in the presentation about the common areas, this is more or less the minimum that we would want to see the homeowners association to have in terms of rights and responsibilities. We're not putting a limit on it.
Staff's going to be reviewing the CC&Rs. What will you be looking for to determine whether they pass or they don't pass?
Well, basically, we want to make sure that there are CC&Rs and that they do form a homeowners association, that the homeowners association at least has the basic rights and responsibilities that were explained in the presentation.
I assume the DRE, do they provide minimum guidelines of what the CC&Rs should contain?
That is my understanding.
And you'll be looking to make sure it complies with that. Okay, thank you. For those residents that choose not to purchase, and the conditions reference, and particularly the low income, that they are restricted based on what the state code provides. However, we had entered into a settlement agreement with this applicant a few years back, which provided for certain benefits for low income and also for moderate income. Will those agreements stay in force and effect after this subdivision if it were approved? And I wonder, and if so, why is there not a reference to that in the conditions?
I wasn't party to the settlement agreement, so I would like to defer to the city manager on that question.
As part of the settlement several years back, your council will recall that low-income residents were granted, low and moderate income residents were granted longer-term leases. I believe it was 34-year leases for low-income residents, and I think it was a 7-year lease for the moderate-income residents. Nothing in your approval tonight is affecting those leases. That frankly, it would be outside, I think, of your purview those are private contracts at this point between the property owner and the individual tenants, and I don't think that the city would have the authority to break any of those agreements. So they would remain in force and effect whether this is approved or not tonight.
Would it be wise to attach them as part of the conditions so that it's very clear that that agreement is in force, and to also attach the other settlement agreement that we had recently?
Madam Mayor, attaching, I think, the individual leases for the individual tenants to the conditions of approval, it seems to me that could potentially become problematic. I mean, the city is not party to those agreements. I don't know whether or not we officially have endorsed some of the terms and language in there, and I don't think the city would want to be in a position where we were in a position of enforcing any of the terms in the leases. I think if the concern is whether or not those leases would remain in force in effect, I think it's a question you can ask the applicant and you can ask the city attorney. But based on my conversations that I've had with the applicant and attorneys on this matter, is those contracts, that's what a lease is, will remain independent of the approval tonight.
Because one of the criticisms we had before was that we had set up some conditions in place, but then we weren't really enforcing them. That we said, oh, but that's your fare now, and that's one of the things that the residents were really disappointed about, that we had set up a system, but we weren't enforcing it. So we're kind of in that same boat here, saying that, well, we have these previous settlement agreements with us. Is there a way of attaching that to this somehow so that we do have some ownership, so we could sue if we needed to also? If they weren't being
I don't see
complied
a
with.
problem attaching it. I just don't think it has any particular legal effect. The agreements stand on their own, and referencing them in the resolution doesn't really change the legal effect of those agreements. You certainly could attach them. I don't see a problem doing that.
Yeah, and I think that would be maybe a good resolution. I think my only concern, and maybe the heart of my question, is that the conditions that were of approval in Section 5, subsection 3, listing the limitations on future rent increases for non-purchasing homeowners, only lists subjects A and B, okay? Now, it says who are not subject to a long-term lease, and maybe that is meant to capture the particular ones who had 34-year lease. I mean, I would feel better if we were more, clear about what we mean by a long-term lease, what long-term lease, and that these conditions aren't meant to in any way abrogate or limit the prior settlement agreement that we had entered into, and maybe listing it as one of the two items that are currently there, adding another item, and that's why I think that I wanted to raise that issue and making sure that we're not interfering with the applicant's rights in requesting that, and making sure that the conditions of approval language is going to clearly incorporate and reference back to that prior agreement. But those are my questions. Thank you, Mayor.
The item B under 5, that talks about rent increases for non-purchasing homeowners who are not low income. Who's going to monitor that? And is that the homeowners association? Are they going to be privy to that information?
I would think that if there's complaints made to the homeowners association, and the homeowners association could deal with it, or they could come to the city and say, there's a problem with the applicant following the conditions of this particular permit.
And do you have any questions?
I have no additional
Okay, well, let's open it up to the applicant to make a presentation, and then we'll open it up to the public after that for any questions or comments. Good evening.
Good evening. It's nice to see most of you again. My name is Mark Alpert, and as you know, I represent the applicant. Let me talk first Just a few brief comments. Appreciate the staff report and staff recommendation. This subdivision doesn't affect the leases. They're not going to touch the leases. The people who are on those long-term leases, the subdivision happens, it doesn't have any legal effect on it. There's a contract between my client and the folks who signed those leases that says they have a right to continue renting that space under the terms of the lease. And of course, under Government Code 66-427.5, they have a right to continue renting. This is not some kind of backdoor way to try to get out of these leases. It's not. That's the least of concerns. So I don't know if you want to attach private leases to this public agreement, and might have some concerns about that. But again, we're stating publicly for the record, those are binding leases, and they're going to remain in effect. They're going to be honored as they have been honored. So, Robert DeWitt here is engineer on the project, who's familiar with some of the infrastructure projects that are in place, and I think Kim Shantz explained it correctly. The reason that there's language that says there's no construction that's associated with this is because this particular application isn't to construct any improvements. There are planned improvements in the infrastructure, et cetera, that, through all the utilities. It's going to be updated and modernized. Now, do you want to hear, if you want to hear about that, I can have the engineer come up and talk about that.
I think we do at some point.
Okay. And unless there are other questions, I'll just have our engineer, Mr. DeWitt, come up and talk about the status of that project.
Thank you. Good evening.
Robert DeWitt, civil engineer, representing the applicant. We are in a long-term process with primarily PG&E, but also with Soquel Creek Water District on utility upgrades, the design of those, and we are getting near the completion of the plan stage, and then there will be a subsequent construction stage. Right now, the water system consists of galvanized 2-inch pipes, to my understanding. There's a master meter that serves the entire subdivision, and the plan is to put Soquel Creek water mains down these streets, 6-inch mains, and then have individual meters at each of the coaches, so that master meter can be eliminated and replaced with individual meters. We give the residents control over their water use. Same thing with the electrical and the gas. There'll be individual meters installed and upgrades to the infrastructure that provides the water, the electricity and the gas to the units. So that process is underway, and I think the construction will probably be over the early spring, something like that.
You going to do new roads also when you do a new overlay on the roads?
The roads will have to be repaved as a result of this because of the trenching and disturbance and so forth, yes.
Mike?
Do you see any significant challenges with regard to the sewer system? Which seems, we've heard that's just been epidemic up there.
Yeah.
Is it just the age of it? Is it the fall? Is it the connection?
I think the sewer system's going to remain in private hands, so that will probably become a feature of the responsibility of the homeowners association.
I can briefly speak to that.
Yeah,
I think there were some issues previously, but as I understand it, there was one section, basically quite a few years ago, they completely replaced one section of the sewer system and modernized it, but there was an older section that hadn't happened. And then just within the last couple of years, I think they just basically replaced and upgraded the whole remaining sewer system. I don't believe, is that correct?
My understanding, yeah.
Right. And Randy Reed is here in the audience too. So I do believe there had been some issues that arose a couple of years ago, but I think that whole system has been updated and modernized.
Are there any questions? Dennis?
Bob, how about stormwater?
There's no improvements planned for that at this point.
You have a piece of property that's almost 100% full with concrete and structure.
True.
What's what's happening to that water now? Is that going directly to the ocean?
I think it's all surface runoff, and, I'm not aware of any particular drainage issue out there on that, and since there's no new construction, no new impervious surfaces, that situation is not expected to change.
I think there was an issue with standing water that we heard about at one point.
More a paving issue
And-
than anything else.
Oh, paving issue, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is there any plans for any fire hydrants internally in that, and when the 6-inch main goes in?
Yes. Yeah, there will be fire hydrant upgrades and connected to the 6-inch mains.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. We might have some more questions later.
I'll be here.
All right, no questions for Bia then?
I have one, Mr. Opera, if you
Sure.
don't mind. Right now, there appears to be some encroachment along the Union Pacific corridor that people had built on decks and different structures there. Would you be agreeable to allow us to put a condition of approval in here, or adding a condition that prior to any sales of those properties along that side, that all infrastructure, decks, and structures be removed from the Union Pacific corridor?
Right. Actually, Jamie mentioned to me, the first I heard of it, an issue about that was tonight, and what we talked about was a condition that said no lot will be sold in which there is a physical encroachment on the right-of-way.
Okay, great.
And that we're fine with that condition.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll open the public hearing now. Would anyone like to speak about this issue? Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council again. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared to speak tonight on any of this until I heard your presentation. I know how hard staff and the council has worked on protecting the people in Surf and Sand, and I know how hard Mr. Albert has worked on protecting his clients. He's been here many times, flown up here away from his family in Orange County, and I respect that. I feel as president of the association, homeowners association currently right now at Surf and Sand, and that I do need to speak right now because, sir, I didn't catch your name, but when you started your presentation tonight, you showed pictures on your PowerPoint's presentation that showed this beautiful lawn, et cetera, and one of the things that crossed my mind immediately was you were showing pictures of, actually, that City of Capitola's property that you showed. That did not belong to that mobile home. That belongs to the City of Capitola. So I felt offended that pictures were shown that didn't depict exactly what the situation is. And there were a number of things that came up in your staff report. I took, what's the word? I don't want to say offense, because obviously you worked very hard on that also. But I'm really concerned because I feel an obligation here to protect the seniors and the elderly in this park. I already know, as far as myself, I invested over $400,000 my whole law enforcement retirement in my home. And I can't even speak of myself because I already know that's gone, because even though I had qualified for a 34, they wanted my estranged husband's salary, which he's not even the owner of the home. It's myself and my disabled daughter. But irregardless, I accepted the 8-year lease at the last minute. And I'm having a problem with things that are presented here right now. And I know Mr. Albert, and I believe him, that he is not going to attack the long-term leases of Heidi and Eleanor and all these people I respect. The ones I mentioned that are the ones that have been giving service to this community and have lived here they were retired. But to get their 34-year lease, it took us months and months, and we actually had to hire an attorney to represent them to finalize those 252 pages of a lease that nobody would sign in their right mind, but they had their choice. They had 5 o'clock on a certain date, either sign it or you don't get a lease. And I believe Mr. Albert that he is going to enforce that lease to the day they die. And But that doesn't help them when they're 85 years old and Ross Smith is 90 years old. And Bill Newman, who just passed, and my best friend in the park, has 10 kids, and he can't pass that home. He had to take I'm not even going to go into what he took on that home. And I looked up today what he paid for that new mobile home he bought in that park in 1995. And he invested $204,000. He was a teacher at Saratoga High School in the science department, and that's all gone. He can't even leave that to his kids. And I like Randy, and I'm glad he's going to inherit this from his father and his brothers and sisters. But my God, your grandparents bought this 4 acres, 0.35 acres. It was a strawberry field. We had a plane crash on that field. And it was a strawberry field. And they bought it with another couple. They both paid $4,000 each. I went and looked it up at the assessor's office. They're still paying taxes on agriculture land, and it's not. This land has made them a lot of money, and they have a right to do that. That's capitalism in this world. That is part of the American way, and I think it's wonderful that they're making profit on this, and I'm behind them, because one thing you learn as a cop, there's 2 sides to every story, and I saw the frustration in Randy's letters to the editor in the Sentinel, and he depicted the fact that he could get more as a parking lot, and that is true. But his family bought this in the 50s, and they have made millions of dollars collecting under rent control rent. And they agreed to the rent control rent when it changed from the county of Santa Cruz to the city of Capitola. They accepted that. And I feel sorry for the city. You've been sued a number of times. And I feel bad for Mr. Albert, because he has worked hard and he's trying to get this together. And I'm telling you, this isn't right yet, because things that are prepared in that staff report are not correct, sir. And I'm having a problem with that. You started off thanking the police union for being reasonable and fair, and that's all the people who have invested and decided to retire in this community have expected from this city, to be reasonable and fair. And that's all I have to say now. My mind is just, I wasn't going to say anything, because I was accepting the word of Mr. Albert, and it's not that I think he's being false on this, but I think when it comes to subdivision, there are requirements that streets are not to be faulty like they are. And the gas lines and the amps, and Mr. Taramini, I know I'm not supposed to address anybody personally, but there's someone on the city council who's an electrician, and he knows there's less than 30 amps in these homes. For God, how can you get new homes or develop this property when the streets aren't fixed and the gas meters? Is this burden to go on the new homeowners association? They have exhausted everything they can off this land. And I don't blame them. They want to put this burden on somebody else, but it sure isn't to be on your seniors and your disabled of the community. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking, Sandy, because I think your information and history is really important, and you expressed the frustration that the residents had, that they had this lease that took them so long to get, and as you say, over 200 pages. It was a terrible process, absolutely terrible process. Yes, please come up. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Veronica Shepherdson, and I'm a fairly new resident owner within the last 7 years or so. It's my understanding that years ago, and this is just from talking to people in the park and getting bits and pieces, that Mr. Reed did try to sell the park to the residents years ago, and that the majority of the owners did want to buy, and that there was going to be a mechanism in place for them to buy. And at the last minute, a couple people put the kibosh on that. If that sale had gone through, Bill Newman would have had something to pass on to his heirs when he recently died. there's a lot of good people that lost their homes. I still own my mobile home. I rent it out because I can't afford to live in it. I have to live somewhere else. I'm hoping that this sale will go through so that we can have a little bit more control. There is some unknown about the infrastructure, but it sounds like it's doable. I think the homeowners association is going to have to be strong. They're going to have to be knowledgeable with budgeting, projecting, if certain systems crumble, to make sure that there's money in reserves to cover that. But I am in support. My one thing is, what are they going to do with the homes that have already been knocked down? Are the pads just going to sit there, or will new homes be able to be placed on there? I'm assuming Ron Reed owns those, and he may put some new homes on there. What's going to happen with the infrastructure, and what does exactly no construction mean? And that's it.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to speak? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Valerie Tudor, and I spoke at the last meeting about this and expressed my concerns as to how much the homeowners, the people who choose to buy their homes, would have to pay towards updating the utilities in the park. All the utilities are in a very fragile state, and it's very vague as to what utilities are going to be upgraded before purchase, what's going to be done afterwards. Will the new homeowners have to pay for the roads to be paved? Will we have to pay for the sewer system? There's so many unknowns, and I want this clarified before I choose to make the purchase. You mentioned forming a homeowners association. We need to know the price of the land, or we need to know what our commitment to pay for the utilities is going to be before we choose to buy the land. So forming a homeowners association is not going to be an immediate thing. We need to have the facts before us before we choose to buy. And the last thing I was thinking of, if there are 73 spaces and 42 mail-outs to households, that leaves 31 spaces owned by Mr. Reed. Does Mr. Reed have a homeowners association vote for each one of those 31 spaces he now owns? And if the people who choose to buy the land, if the number is less than 31, does that mean that every decision made at a homeowners association will be, the final vote will be Mr. Reed's? Am I making myself clear about that, or does that not work out? What I'm trying to say is, Mr. Reed will always have the overriding vote if he owns more spaces than the people who choose to buy the land. So would you mind asking Mr. Alpert if he can answer any of those questions? And also the gentleman who presented the work he's done in the park. Supposedly the utilities are being updated as we speak, and I haven't seen anything that indicates to me that anything is being updated. I've seen homes that have been left and they have been painting them and maybe redoing the inside of the homes, but I haven't seen any external updating at all. So if you wouldn't mind asking those questions, that would help clarify it for me.
Thanks.
Thank
We'll
you.
be happy to do that. Would anyone else like to speak? Do you want to come up, Mr. Alpert, and answer any of those questions? That would be helpful.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. The plan is to do all the improvements before any of the lots are sold. But the DRE process is what really governs that essentially what happens is you have to get a study done. And this is a state law. It's all regulated closely by state law. And basically what you have to do before you sell lots is you have to get an internal analysis of what the needs are, the capital needs are for the property. You have to get cost estimates for what that'll be. You have to make representations about the useful life of the existing improvements. You have to create estimates of the HOA fees that are going to be necessary to achieve maintenance of these improvements, to take care of these improvements. Of course, you disclose the price of the lot as part of your offer paper, and you disclose the estimated HOA fees as part of this. And this is all information that gets disclosed to all of the residents before they make a decision of whether or not they want to buy a lot. Now, as I said, the reason there hasn't been any physical construction going on yet is, I think Mr. DeWitt already explained, we're in the process of getting those plans approved by the utilities. And the reason they have to do that is because essentially what's happening is these utilities are being turned over. There's going to be direct billing of these utilities to each space, so that it's actually no longer going to even be a responsibility of the park to maintain this infrastructure. But in order to turn those over, you have to build them up to current standards so that they'll be accepted by the utility. Mr. DeWitt can correct me, and if I'm wrong in any of this, he knows it better than me. So that's what's happening. They're not physically seeing anything happening, because what's happening right now is the planning process with the utilities. So I'm not sure if I hope that addressed the questions that I heard.
Well, I think the residents, some of the residents' concerns are that the park has been terribly run down, and it shouldn't be their responsibility to pay for all the upgrades, that some of this should be borne by the landowner. And we've experienced this in other parks that were bought by the residents, and that it was the same issue. They said, this is all deferred maintenance. It shouldn't be on our backs to have to pay for this when the owner collected all the money, made a lot of money all those years, and didn't put enough back.
Right, and those are different kinds of transactions where the residents are buying them. They don't go through a DRE process where they get disclosed to them. If, for example, for some reason the Reeds decided they didn't want to do this infrastructure update, they'd have to, in order to try to sell somebody a lot, tell them, hey, you got to spend $50,000, to do all this infrastructure. Do you want to pay X dollars for the lot? So in other words, they're going to understand exactly what it is they're buying into as part of this DRE process. But as I said, the owner's in the process right now of updating the entire infrastructure. And the great part about it is they'll no longer have that responsibility by turning it over to the utilities.
So is he going to pay for the improvements?
Yes, that's what he's doing right now.
Stephanie, can I add this?
Sure, Dennis.
Mr. Albert. The things that you're planning on upgrading right away would be the water system and power and gas, those systems. And the reason you're doing that in advance is, number one, is that you can't really have legal lots of record unless you have powers to them individually. Is that true?
No, it's not a legal requirement.
It's not a legal requirement. You could stay with the meter system you have and still have the individual lots?
Yes.
Okay. But those are things that you plan on doing before you sell any lots?
That's what they're currently in the process of doing that before they, and the plan is before they sell lots.
And also DRE would be reading that too, because they would be telling potential buyers that the water system's been upgraded, the power's been upgraded.
Part of your disclosures that the DRE has to approve, you have to provide exactly the condition of the existing infrastructure, what's the useful life of the existing improvements, what their estimated cost is of doing those improvements over time.
So the DRE becomes the safeguard for the buyers that these improvements have come in. Okay.
Right.
Now the difference in the process for us in a subdivision, where we would be actually getting improvement plans as a jurisdiction, and we would actually require you to bond for those improvements. Be in the approval of the map so you can build them.
Right. So, by the way, the DRE does have a bonding requirement of sorts where you have to fund essentially the estimated costs for for that infrastructure, you do have to bond it.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, and what happens is as you sell lots, you're basically, you undo that obligation as individual lots are sold off. But that, yeah, you do have to bond that.
Okay, but do you plan on having these improvements in before you go through the DRE process, or are you going to do?
Okay, it's not me. I wish I owned the property, but that is the plan of the REITs. And again, as I said, they're in process of doing it. They're paying this gentleman to do it.
Well, our safeguard then becomes the fact that we get a final review of the CC&Rs as it is, and so we can see there that in the DRE, the white papers would be stating that these improvements are in, right? So the
Sure,
city would
yeah.
see that? Okay.
Yeah, it'll describe the current condition of the infrastructure.
Okay.
And
Okay.
by that time, again, it'll be direct serve utilities to those spaces, and of course that'll.
Okay, and the city will see that in our documentation that we have final approval on.
I don't think that's going to be in the CC&Rs. I think that will be in the papers that the DRE, that goes to the DRE. I don't think that's going to be in the CC&Rs. The process would the process would generally go after we get our final map. We go to the DRE.
Yes. Okay.
The homeowners will still have some maintenance responsibilities years down the road when a sewer line breaks or a water line breaks. So I think that's something they do build in. They build in the
Right,
cost for
that's part
redoing
of
the roads and to putting a new roof on the clubhouse and new asphalt or any maintenance like that is they do consider that.
Right, that's part of a statewide association law, and again, you have to have an estimate of those costs in the future. You have to have an estimated HOE fee to cover that, and if you've ever been in an HOA, you get reports every year on how much you have in various capital accounts, et cetera. All that information is provided.
Why was the lease so long? Why did it need to be over 200 pages?
Well, I mean, if you look at the mobile home residency law and the complexity that's been built into the mobile home residency law, if you look at all the different kinds of litigation that's come out, the complexities of the business that we're operating under, that's right, law firms and lawyers who want to anticipate the issues that can come up have drafted long leases.
It's very burdensome. I'm familiar with leases from being a renter for many, many years. And, you can usually do it in less than 10 pages. And they're sort of boilerplate, and that's kind of what this was. You didn't need to attach all that other stuff on there it just was confusing and burdensome and very stressful for the residents. Michael?
You are a lawyer and you are paid by the word.
No, you're not paid by the word.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple quick comments. I think it's important that you understand the sense that I feel here from this board and from the public is it's the word apprehension, okay? Because the clarity of this, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're going to develop CC&Rs, and those CC&Rs are like any other condominium or common complex. And the reason I bring this in is that the streets are actually part of the common land. So it's not just taking care of the picnic tables, it's the streets and everything that goes along with that. And I think our concern, or our apprehension that's shared by the residents is that the improvements are going to be made prior to, so that they will not be part of the CC&Rs after that we need to repave the streets and we do all the additional improvements. So I think what we're just looking is for some calming words that reassure that the improvements are going to be done before, and they're going to get that purchase price. The price will come after the improvements are done. And if that purchase price, part of that price is built in because of the improvements that were put in, they're going to understand that. But they don't want to inherit the property with all the repairs yet to be made. Did you understand the apprehension here?
Sure, and I think that's why the owners made the decision to do the improvements up front. And just you want to be able to build these lots in this park to modern standards which people accept with electrical amperage that's sufficient. But the ultimate power they have is they have the right to rent forever. And if they rent, and those folks, for example, who are on those long-term leases that are still very favorable, all those folks that stay in there on those long-term leases, it's the obligation of the park owner to pay that percentage of the homeowners association. So in other words, if it's not a good deal, he's stuck with that obligation because he owns the lots.
Right, and I understand that. Conceivably, he's going to be paying 50% of the assessment fees, so that doesn't make his position any better. So it's better to do the improvements, assess the price, and then it'll be a normal homeowners association. And that's just the assurance that I think the residents want.
Right, and I know there was one comment or concern about there being more than 50% or something like that in the HOE. I can guarantee you the last thing Ron Reed wants to do and Randy Reed wants to do is be in the middle of another situation where, you know, he's at odds with the homeowners. If they're selling lots, they're selling lots. It's to get out of the business.
Thank you.
Is there any resolution to the lawsuit against the current residents?
Yeah.
That's been ended and solved or resolved?
All of the lawsuits over the leases and the lease offer, everybody's been offered their leases. The leases are all agreed upon. So I think all those issues are resolved.
But there was other lawsuits after that against residents. Have
There
those
is-
been resolved, or are those they
The only thing I think that
soon?
might still be, I think there's an appeal still pending of an attorney's fees request.
When is that going to be heard?
I don't know, it's before the Court of Appeal.
I think a lot of time and energy has been wasted also on this suing the residents. That's not a good way to treat your tenants and that have been loyal and been there for a long time and are elderly, and I don't think that's
Just to be clear, the park owner hasn't sued the residents.
I believe he has.
Okay.
Maybe you weren't aware of that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you very much. There's another resident that also wanted to wait. Why don't you have a seat and we'll ask you some more questions if you have any. Thank
Mr.
you.
Albert?
Would you address the council, please? Thanks.
I just...
No, I want you to address us.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to address the last issue, and actually, Mr. Albert's law firm, Hart, King and Coldren, is suing Bill Newman, who's now deceased, Heidi Huffaker, myself, my disabled daughter, 90-year-old Ross Smith, Steve, I can't even think of his last name right now, I'm shaking, who's been in the park for over 15 years, Mary and her partner, Leslie Cohn, Shirley Hill, 85. Yes, there is a lawsuit with Hart, King and Coldren from the park owner suing the residents who complained and joined the other park residents who complained about the failing infrastructure and the roads of this park and the gas and the sewer spillage and the water drainage, because they stuck up for the other people that didn't get a lease. We're now being sued for $90,000, all the low-income people. Yes, there is a lawsuit by your firm currently happening right now.
Thank you very much. There was another resident that wanted...
what that is? Can I?
Let me have somebody else speak that hasn't. There was one other lady that wanted to speak, I think. It's part of the public hearing. Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Michelle Newby, and I live in Capitola. I'm a property owner, and I and my neighbors in the Jewel Box have been concerned for an awfully long time about the surf and sand community because it is a ghetto, and it's an embarrassment. Now, what I'm seeing tonight looks to be a proposal to improve things, and I would love to see that, because we homeowners who pay property taxes take pride in our property. We have guests who come to see us from out of town. We live at the beach, and people come to see us from out of town. And in order to get down to the village, whose esplanade has a new fish statue, we have to walk by or through that ghetto. It's so embarrassing. And I can't think of any reason why. To my knowledge, when a development is proposed, the developer begins to sell lots. Each one of these sales a percentage of that goes into a reserve fund, which eventually will be turned over to the HOA. The infrastructure, the streets, the electrical, all of that should be brought up to code. And I don't mean, I have pictures here that I walked through the park the last time there was a big sewer leak. I'd love to share them with you. There was sewer on the first street, the street that Sandy lives on. Sandy's my friend, but I'm not doing this for her selfishly. I'm speaking for my own benefit and for my neighbors who live in the surrounding area. I called her up and she told me that she couldn't come to dinner at my house because there was another sewer leak. It was horrendous. So I took my camera and I took a whole bunch of pictures of that. There was actually sewer in the street that was like that deep. Now, when that street is fixed, when the infrastructure is fixed, I don't mean that it needs to have more asphalt laid over it. Those streets need to be taken up entirely. They need to be properly grounded with rock. New streets have to be put in that would look like a city street. That is the only acceptable alternative here. And, you know, I'm not hearing that that's going to happen. I'm hearing that there's going to be another Band-Aid. And Mr. Albert, if you think that
please address the
charging
council.
Someone $50,000 when they buy their space, I think we're talking more like $1 million for the streets in that community to bring them up to code. And I don't know if you're interested in seeing these pictures.
You can send them to us if you can on email.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But I'm really concerned that this thing isn't being spelled out. I don't think there's enough monitoring of the infrastructure improvement. You guys need to keep an eye on this. I don't know what kind of authority you have, but if we're going to do something up there and finally get rid of this disgrace, can't we have nice streets and a park that is a matter of pride in the community? That is the only eyesore in Capitola. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else that hasn't spoken yet like to speak, please come up. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm a new resident at Surf and Sand. I was a little confused in the slide presentation that you presented. You said something about the Mellow Act, and the Mellow Act was void or not applicable for the residents if you choose to just continue renting. So then how does that affect people if they choose to rent instead of buying the property, if the Mellow Act is not going to be honored?
Do you want to answer that?
Want me to answer that? Or?
Do you want me to? We're saying that we can't apply the Mellow Act here because one of the things that says that you can not follow it is if you don't have 50 acres in town, and we don't have 50 acres. So we're saying the Mellow Act does not apply here.
So then how do we know what the lease amount will be if the Mellow Act is not on?
It's separate from the Mellow Act.
Okay.
So the purchase price you're talking about?
If you decided not to purchase and you
The
continued
lease?
leasing.
We're all waiting with bated breath.
Okay.
Anyone else who hasn't spoken? Okay, Mr. Hart, do you want to continue to make some remarks or answer questions? Oh, here's one fellow. Good evening.
Yeah, hi. I'm not really involved in this project, but I just wondered what is the connection fees to the water system?
Don't know about that yet. Thanks.
Does the individual owner have to pay the connection fees?
I don't know. I don't know when that's going to be done. Okay, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I just want to briefly mention, the plan is to put in new streets. I just wanted to mention that to you. And the other thing is, just to be clear on the record, the thing that's pending, what happened was we settled with a large group of tenants, extended long-term leases to them, they signed, they settled. Within 45 days or something like that of that settlement, which included complete releases, we were settling everybody's claims. They sued the Reeds again. And that's, the legal fees are illegal fees incurred because folks who settled claims still tried to sue again right after that. So that's all I have.
Would anyone else like to address us? Any other questions that council members have of the applicant or staff members? Then I will close the public hearing and bring it back, and would like to start, Dennis?
Yeah, I'll be happy to go first. There is no better watchdog on what's going to happen with this project than DRE. Believe me, the process that they go through to get approval and get their white papers to sell this property is extensive. They need engineering reports, they need budget reports, they need to know conditions, and this is all done to protect the people who live there. We could, as a jurisdiction, could never do the job that DRE does, and it's a state level. So I have great confidence that the homeowners will be protected in the infrastructure that is going to take place before and what's going to take place after. And what doesn't take place before, it has to be written into the budget of the subdivision, the amount of money that it takes to cover the cost of those improvements over a period of time. Now, what that does is whatever isn't taken care of, let's just take sewer, for example. What happens is that has to go into the cost of the budget, and yes, that is put into the cost of the people who are living there in their homeowners' dues over a period of time. So if water's taken care of, if PG&E is taken care of, and the roads are taken care of, at the time that they file their white papers, those things are not budget items that will be major impact. It's the ones outside of that they'll have to take care of. The CC&Rs, the budget, and this whole process is much better taken care of at the state level than is both being a mobile home park, but also being under the Department of Real Estate. I'm going to vote for this project to move this thing forward. My biggest concern is this map right here. I mean, I don't think it's a good financial investment to make a subdivision like this. This is just a mismatch of lots, and I think it'll come back as being problems for the owner, but if they choose, I'm going with them, they choose to do it this way, that's fine with me. You choose to do it, and you have to live with that configuration. And so I support the project, and I think that we have good safeguards in place. I'd like to add one condition when it comes up, whoever makes the motion, that we require that prior to the listing of the sales of any lots along the rail corridor, that all deck structures and infrastructure be removed from the corridor property.
Michael.
Mr. Alper, if I could ask you, is that condition that was just read acceptable to the developer?
I'm just some of the language, like all infrastructure, is very broad. The way I think I phrased it was any encroachments in that right-of-way would be removed prior to the sale of a lot. So you can have something that's there that might necessarily not be an encroachment of the right-of-way. For example, you could have some kind of a underground.
No, we're talking...
right, that's fine.
I think the intent is that a fence is a deck or, a structure that encroaches upon the right-of-way.
But in that, I would prefer that it's taken care of before you list the lots. And the reason for that is a real estate agent is going to say that deck's part of the deal. So it needs to be removed before the property goes up for sale. That's all. I'll agree to your wording if you add that into it.
I mean, even landscaping needs to be removed because it's not on that person's property.
That's a little difficult. I mean, lawns, there's things all over the right-of-way that are growing.
Yeah, the landscaping, isn't the issue. The issue is that right now it's the decks that come over into it. So all I'm saying is before you list the property for sale, agree to just you'll move those categories of infrastructure back.
So all encroachments will be removed prior to the listing?
Yes.
Can I talk with my client for a second?
Sure.
Okay, while he's talking to the client, I have to agree with Dennis that there's far more onerous oversight that's getting ready to be taking place than we can ever impose. In addition to that, they're about to sell lots. A developer, and that's what we're talking about here, is a developer, is about to sell to people who are going to own the lots. They're not going to have a bunch of renters anymore with no legal grounds. They're going to have a bunch of investors. So, again, they're going to have 76 challenges that are far worse than we could ever present. And I am willing to leave it up to the DRE and the state if this all happens properly. And hopefully we have agreement that the encroachment language is acceptable.
Right. I mean, I prefer before the sale of a lot, but we can live with before listing the lot for sale.
Great, thank you. So, and the success of it, as we all know, is not this body's responsibility. So I would like to move the staff recommendation with the additional language of this condition prior to the sale of an individual lot with physical encroachments on the rail right-of-way. Said encroachments shall be removed.
Mike, can
Prior
we...
to listing.
Prior to listing, okay. I'll second that motion.
Sam.
Discussion? Thank you, Mayor. Well, obviously, there's still a lot of emotion around surf and sand, and hopefully the action that we take tonight can move forward to helping us maybe heal a lot of the rift that still seems to take place. But, you know, trying to cut through all that emotion, you know, I think that our jurisdiction here and what we can impose is rather limited. The survey of the residents they are in vast approval of this subdivision. And to me, and our planning commission has approved this subdivision. I think that, to me, in terms of approving this subdivision or this MAP Act request, we don't have, I think, a lot of grounds to oppose it because of the residents' survey. And you know, and I mean, having all this discussion about the infrastructure and improvements, that even seems to be beyond our jurisdiction. And as Dennis and Mike has mentioned, the DRE is going to be governing that. And with the subdivision, we will be moving forward with having, I think, the improvements up there. The applicants already testified to many of them, and all the residents and as well as the adjoining neighborhoods are going to see an improvement because the mobile homes, the lots, will be owner-occupied, and we will start to see, you know, really pride of ownership in developing the Surf and Sand mobile home park. I think the only area of discretion that we had up here and still have is the question about the Mello Act and whether or not we were going to enforce the Mello Act on this particular application. We have the ability to exempt it, but we weren't necessarily required to exempt it. However, you know, because the residents have voted in favor of this, because there's really in actuality going to be no removal of any low-income and moderate housing from the park, or displacement of low-income and moderate-income residents from the park, and also because of previous actions by this council in exempting the Pack Cove mobile home park from the Mello Act. Because of the hardship finding, I don't see how we in good conscience could impose those requirements on this particular application. And I think that because of this previous settlement agreement that we had with the Reeds, even warrants more because we secured through that the low-income and moderate-income housing. So on that basis, I would be inclined, and I would also, as request the council would include in the motion, that there's a finding here that this application is exempt from the Mello Act requirements. I do have a request for additional changes to the conditions of approval, which are on page 63 of the agenda packet. And in the first paragraph, and because we have no jurisdiction over the utilities or improvements. And I think it just makes it confusing to say that there will be the last sentence here, no new construction of streets, utilities, or similar improvements is proposed or authorized as a result of this approval. I think that kind of flies in the face of what we actually want to see accomplished there. Is a great deal of new construction of streets and new utilities and similar improvements. And so we have the ability to say that they will be provided to the extent that the DRE requires, that maybe that should be a condition of approval. If that's not appropriate for us to do, I think that sentence should just be deleted. I think it's pretty clear from this application and the four corners of it that this is it's strictly a subdivision map request. It is not about new projects, for our purposes. Also in number 4, concerning the CC&Rs, to me it's unclear as to on what basis the city attorney and the community development department is going to review and approve them. And I would suggest that we had language that they will be in compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. And also in number 5, I would feel better, and I think this is maybe even, it's not legally significant, but for the comfort of all those people that struggled through to get those long-term leases, that there be some reference in there that we acknowledge that they exist, all parties do, and that for those who are not purchasing, that they will still be able to live there under the terms of those leases. So under those subsections A and B, I would like to see, I don't think we need to attach all the actual leases, but some language in that is referencing that those will continue to apply. I think that would provide some comfort for those particular residents there. So in order for, I would like to add the maker of the motion to maybe if they would consider amending it to include those additional changes, and with that, then I would support the application. Thank you.
I have a question of staff. What does that mean for the city community development director and the attorney to review and approve the CC&Rs?
Well,
is that just means review and we decide?
I think Councilman Story said it correctly. I mean, that's what staff's going to be doing, is making sure that they do comply with all applicable regulations and state law. But putting it in there would not be a problem, and putting it in there would make it clearer. That's true.
Is this reviewed after DRE approves it, or is it before DRE approves it?
I believe it's before.
Before?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just a couple quick things. I think all of the valid comments have already been made by other council members. And at this point, the developer is going to do with his project what he wants. And the improvements that are going to be made are going to just be reflected either in the rents they're going to be finally come up with or the price of those lots when they are sold. So, it's reasonable to believe that, that the apprehension that's there can be calmed because the improvements are going to be made and the cost of the lots will reflect that. And one woman that came up made the valid point, which I just want to reiterate, and that is, we have very little say in this matter, and that's what it boils down to. This is going to be dealt with the state, and the project's going to come back, and the developer's going to do what he wants, and the prices are going to be set. And, the only thing that's going to control that a lot is the restrictions of the CC&Rs and what's mandated. So, with the things that we're having here, just to get these added in here, if that makes us all feel a little bit better, that's great. But this project is pretty much having its way, and, I'm going to support the project and believe that what's going to come out of this is going to be an improved infrastructure. And as was mentioned here, some actual homeowners that will own their land, own their mobile home, and there'll be a little bit of pride, and it will not be an eyesore. So I'm going to believe in this project.
Well, it's too bad we've had all this trouble around it, because otherwise it would be a pretty easy process to look at this piece of land and look at subdividing it. We've done subdivisions before, but there's so much bad history here that I'm not going to support it, because there's been so much deception and heartbreak and heartache around this. I don't expect that it's going to end tomorrow. So I'm not going to support it.
Stephanie, I have a question of staff, please. The conditions of approval, once they're written out, do these get recorded? They get recorded? Yes. No. Okay.
It has not been the city's practice to record the conditions of approval in general.
Okay. So how are they enforceable? Just as, are we the enforcement agency on the conditions of approval?
The city is the enforcement entity of the conditions of approval. Obviously, conditions wherein the final, prior to the recording of the final map are obviously enforceable conditions. It gets more difficult because, frankly, what you'd be doing is having to revoke land use entitlement permits if a condition that you're trying to enforce down the road.
Yeah, I think my reasoning is this, is that if it were recorded against the property, and that would be on the individual parcels that were created, that every person who bought a lot there would see that the conditions of approval, that were given by the city are fulfilled, have been fulfilled, or are to be fulfilled.
It certainly is possible. I understand that the county does record conditions of approval. The question simply becomes is how many of the conditions of approval that we have before us tonight really will persist to the point at which an individual owner is actually acquiring, and how many of them really are related to the specific action tonight, which is the subdivision. Nevertheless, if it's part of the motion, we can record them.
Well, I'll leave staff decide that, but it just seems to be there needs to be notice to potential buyers of what these conditions were.
With regard to the amendment on the motion, this that's been written is acceptable to the motion maker, but any mention of non-construction utilities is not, because it just specifies the nature of this application. And the nature of this application is not for construction. It is not for review of plans. It is merely for the tentative map. So that is the only condition that Councilmember Story presented that I will not include in the motion.
Just to clarify, yes, I understand that, and maybe I may be willing to compromise, but I also asked that on number 4, on the basis of how the CCNRs are going to be evaluated, that they be subject to all applicable laws and regulations.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
If that's acceptable,
Yeah,
okay.
and I think that's apparent, but it would do to enumerate it, and that's what staff is going to do.
Right.
And saying it in there,
That's acceptable.
validates that. Yeah.
I didn't know if Mr. Afford, you wanted to respond to that, or?
There's not a problem with that.
Okay.
If you're
All right.
compliant with the law. No.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
So that is the motion
So-
with the additional conditions.
All right, thank you.
And could you add the language about the staff review will have for the purpose of verifying that the CCNRs comply with all applicable state laws?
I think the council's done a great job in deliberating this difficult issue, and that the additions that you've made are great. They're an improvement, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness.
And it is very difficult, in closing, to not let past experience drive the flavor and tone of our decisions, because that's the hard part about this job, is you can't let that happen. So as we proceed, that's the rationale.
Any other discussion or questions?
Yes, I believe we're not quite sure of the, is there going to be an addition or Councilman Story's amendment?
On the Mellow Act, I don't know if that...
Or the sentence on construction?
Well, no, the sentence on construction is not included in the motion, so that's struck, that we're staying as it is. And with regard to the Mellow Act, that is part of the staff report, is it not? And will that not be part of the documentation for this decision?
That's in the findings.
Thank you.
Attached to your resolution.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other
Well-
comments or questions? Additions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Council, I'd like to thank you for your careful consideration tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck on your project.
Thank you.
Hope you get it done fast.
How you
Yes, certainly.
really mark it. Yeah.
That's okay. Don't worry about it a bit. Thank you.
But it's his, it's his project.
We would, if this was their land,
That's our last item, but we have another meeting after this. So we're going to adjourn as the regular council meeting, and we will reconvene as the successor agency to the former Capitola Redevelopment Agency. Do we need a roll call? Okay. The first item is oral communications. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? Any public comments on this topic? If not, then we'll go on to the consent calendar, which is approval of the minutes of the meeting of October 11th, January 10th, February 21st.
Move the
and
consent.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And the item of business tonight is 4A, consideration of approving the reorganized obligation payment schedule for January 1st through June 30th.
The item that we're bringing forward is the recognized obligation payment schedule. It is similar to the regular 6-month interval schedules that we've been bringing forward in the past. However, there is one change. In this particular schedule, we've reinstated the city RDA loan, which was for originally $618,000. The Department of Finance had denied this. However, due to some recent Superior Court cases, it looks like some of the city RDA agreements are being allowed when the city has re-entered into an agreement prior to the AB 1484 legislation. Our agreements were entered prior to this time. Based on advice from our attorney, we've placed it back on the recognized obligations schedule to see if it will be approved.
So hope springs eternal from the Oversight Board, and we'll see how it pans out when the Oversight Board meets. Just for the council's understanding, there are cases that have been adjudicated in the favor of the cities. Therefore, we're stepping up.
Good.
We're still in the game.
Corey, how much is in the library trust fund now?
I believe, check real quick. I'll have to get back to you on that question.
Okay, thank you.
We're getting close, though, to our...
We could build a half a library or a whole one?
Well, we're probably within 2 years of having the library fund fully funded, give or take, and there's also a library potential for a library bond issue with regard to capital improvements for the library system, which will expand the breadth of our library program immensely.
I think a library discussion is to keep that in the forefront of your mind, because we do have an obligation to construct a library by 2017.
Right. We could always renegotiate that, though.
Yes, we could obviously seek an extension on that, but if we were going to live within the terms of that agreement, the time is becoming nigh to begin to try to plan our new library.
Yeah, we may see our 7,000 square foot, $2 million library become a $6 million, 14,000 square foot library.
Ooh.
That's something to get excited about.
And we do actually have a presentation plan from the library director, who has recently completed a library's master plan for all of the different libraries in the Santa Cruz County library system. We had to defer her. She was scheduled for the next meeting. She's been pushed back to a meeting in October, I believe, and she can come make a presentation on that.
And my apologies, Sam, for stepping in after you did such a good job on the library board, only to be confronted with all good things. It was not fair, and thank you for pulling the heavy load.
We have a copy of that library report.
I can certainly get you a copy. The library facilities master plan has been completed, right? I don't have a digital copy at this point, but I'm sure I can
have a digital copy, and I will pass it to you.
Great,
you can distribute it.
Yeah, or maybe we could print a copy and put it at the counter in case someone wants to read it there.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
We should put one in the library, too, in case someone wants to read it there.
I believe there is one in the library already.
Oh, good. Any other discussion on this? This is to approve the payment schedule and to receive the communication from the Department of Finance. Is there a motion?
I move staff recommendation.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. That's the end of our business, so we are going to adjourn to the next regular meeting. We will skip the meeting and next meeting in August. And hope everybody has a wonderful vacation. Thank you all.
Madam Mayor, I have one question I want to put to our city attorney to take back with him, and I'd be interested to find out